Episode 89, September the 27th, 1915. Loos, the hopeless maze of battle. My men were covered in clay and blood. By John Easton. Read by Tom Ashworth. The author of this narrative, John Easton, was a second lieutenant in the 12th Battalion Royal Fusiliers at the Battle of Loos. Like many others who have written their war reminiscences, he has preferred to use the third person, disguising himself and his comrades under fictitious names. But the Broadchalk, who is the author of this story, pays magnificent tribute to their memory. At first, the din of the bursting shells drove the platoon into its funk holes. The parapet shook, and chunks of earth fell down into the trench through the vibration. But soon it became apparent that there was little except noise to fear. The fuses were too short and the shrapnel was bursting too high. Also, the shells were made of very inferior stuff. Large chunks of a red-hot, coke-like substance landed in the trench, and the men passed their time in seeing who could pick up the largest and hottest piece. One of these chunks landed on Broadchalk's head and hurt him less than a well-aimed clump of turf. Another, a jagged piece of metal this time, tore a hole in the peak of his cap. A nastier customer altogether. The remaining 3 hours before dawn were cheerless, cold and dreary. Broadchalk's eyelids were heavy. A misty drizzle of rain accentuated the cold. There was nothing to wait for all now except the German attack. That it would succeed was out of the question. The main hope was that they would come thick and straight and in the open. There were too many damned obstacles on the left front. Every man acted as sentry unbidden. Broadchalk inspected rifles, for the damp clay tended to clog the bolts, and dropped a hint or two. Aim low and pick your men. You've plenty of time. They can't rush you. If they look like reaching the wire, get out and go for them. Don't wait for orders. He looked at his watch. It was 4:30. "Stand to," he shouted. If only he had a machine gun now. They came as large shadows in the grey mist that hung over the earth. They ran diagonally across the front, each man for himself. They ran as men who have never seen a running track. Some in spiked helmets, some in fatigue caps, and they fell one by one. A fat man hit in the leg, hopped back to their trenches with the help of a fatter friend, their arms entwined about each other's necks. A bullet hit the friend in the rear. He leaped into the air and bowled over his comrade. Of that first line, half a dozen reached the shelter of the houses and dropped into Coron's Alley, a shallow trench on Trevor's, that fellow subaltern, left. The men had fired as one shoots at a fair, with yells of laughter and cheers, some firing from the shoulder. Again a second line. Again that melting away. Again half a dozen men reached the trench. A third attack shot to nothing before it had reached its own wire. "Wouldn't you like a shot, sir?" asked Private Briggs solemnly, offering his rifle. Broadchalk, who had two fronts to watch, and was jumping backwards and forwards in an attempt to miss nothing on either, shook his head with a smile. "That's given them something to think about," he mused. He was worried about those dozen men who had reached the communication trench, and could only hope that Trevor had got them. "Ham and eggs is what I'd like," said Private Millet. "And more eggs than ham. Did you see me hit that fat 'un up in the bum? I saw you knock that bloody weathercock off the church steeple. And me the coffee, and keep your thumb out of the saucer." Broadchalk moved down the line to see Morrill, his company commander, and report. Things were not going too well on the left. Trevor's platoon had had the same success as No. 8 platoon, but against that uncertain flank, the Germans had attacked in great numbers, and it was impossible to judge to what extent they'd been held up. Broadchalk found Morrill worried but cheery. "We'll get the guns onto those houses," he said. "I'll come along with you and see the second in command. Keep an eye out for snipers and watch the windows of the houses." They worked their way back slowly, for the trench was narrow. Ennis, a fellow subaltern, joined Broadchalk, and they sat side by side discussing the situation. The snipers were making the most of their chances. The 2 platoons of A Company had lost their only subaltern, shot through the head. Aubrey had been wounded between the eyes and had been taken back to the rear, temporarily blind. As the morning dragged on, things became hotter. The bombardment was incessant, and under its cover small parties of Germans made their way over towards the left flank, offering but a glimpse of a target. Men began to fall fast, though No. 8 bore charmed lives. By 11 o'clock the Germans had occupied a large stretch of trench between Trevor and the remnants of the North Ants. They were separated from him only by a traverse of sandbags and earth which he had hastily thrown up and manned with the one Lewis gun available. And then the British guns opened, not onto the houses, nor on that stretch of trench occupied the Germans, but slap onto Trevor. They knocked his trench to pieces and decimated his platoon. Sergeant Major Bakewell, an old spindle-legged veteran regular from South Africa, set out alone for the rear to get into touch with the gunners and stop their havoc. When it was obvious that he had been hit, Ennis followed, making for the dump, in the hope of finding an observation officer. Instead, he found a major sitting on a pile of slag, swearing softly under his breath. His eyes lit up at the sight of Ennis. "Can you tell me where the 73rd Brigade are?" he asked. Ennis explained that he belonged to it. "Thank God! I'm your new brigadier and I've just arrived." They moved off together. By this time the right had been driven in. The Germans had seized Slag Alley and the frontal defences of the dump. Broadchalk, thrust forward like a wedge with a range of sight less than 200 yards all told, was oblivious to what was happening to right and left. He concentrated on keeping down the snipers, checking any advances across his field of fire, and repairing the havoc played by the German guns in his trenches. Things were getting more and more lively. There was no time to be tired, hungry, or thirsty. They worked hard getting ready for the great attack that seemed imminent. The British guns had lifted, one great salvo landing full on a large house to Broadchalk's left front, and the whole front of it fell away like a theatre curtain, showing a solid wedge of German infantry packed tight in each room like woodlice under an old plank. Another salvo sent them hurtling for their lives, jumping to the ground from the second story. Broadchalk's platoon emptied its magazines into them, for they had no cover, and few of them survived to crawl back into safety. Into this medley of shrapnel and bullets, Morrill came running down the trench. "Get your men out, Mr. Broadchalk," he shouted. "You're cut off. Get those men out of that trench and make for the rear." A Company, left officerless, looked up in bewilderment. Broadchalk jumped onto the parapet. "You get those men out. I'll look after number 8, shouted Morrell. "Come along, man, hurry up." The appearance of Broadchalk was the signal for the German infantry to open fire. It was the first real target they had had. Behind him, the walls spattered and hissed with the smack of bullets. He felt them whiz past his head and body. For 50 yards he ran, shouting to the men, hauling one up by the hand. Then he cut suddenly through one of the houses and came into the garden beyond, almost tumbling into Morrell, who was running between the houses with what men from number 8 he had been able to collect. There was no time to lose. The front German line was rushing over. The Germans on the left had driven in Trevor and were racing to close the gap. From the dump there came the slow, relentless pop of the Hotchkiss. At the corner of their houses they parted company. "Get back to the trenches behind the dump and hold them at all costs," panted Morrell. "I'll see if I can do anything over here." He ran off in the direction of the trenches that the Sussex had been holding in front of the dump. The machine guns had cut A Company to pieces. The second in command, a sporting colonel of the old school, who had retired before South Africa, was riddled with bullets as he cleared the men out of their trenches. Broadchalk, with the remnants, set out to thread the narrow neck of the bottle. A long strip of ground 600 yards long, lined on one side by the dump and on the other by the houses. The Germans were swarming. If they had thrown a line across the gap, it would have been impossible to get through. A few rushed out from a house, but made off at the show of the bayonet. One fellow fired point blank at Broadchalk from a doorway and missed him. They ran and walked in spasms, keeping a semblance of a line ready to turn if they were pursued. Somehow they slipped through the gap and came out 20 strong. Broadchalk had a bullet through the heel of his boot and another through his cap. Sergeant Piper had gone, Private Brigg, Private Millett, Corporal Hammett, Morrell, Aubrey, and, it seemed, Ennis and Trevor. "They got Mr. Trevor, sir," panted the man at his side. As they came level with the dump, they saw in front of them, running from north to south, Dump Trench in the old German line, packed with the khaki Balmorals of the 9th Division. They jumped into a small communication trench with a sigh of relief. As they scurried along that communication trench in the direction of the Balmorals, a field message was handed down, passing from man to man. Broadchalk opened it eagerly. "The Major General commanding the division has the situation in hand. The 73rd Brigade will retire and occupy the trenches dug for them on the right." Quoted from memory. There was a strange sense of comfort in the words. Broadchalk's confidence during that dash for safety had been on the wane. Now, to his confused and stupefied mind, there came order once more. Things were moving according to plan. A general had the situation in hand. He found himself marveling at the efficiency of any man who could control such a turmoil and make his dispositions on a leaf torn out of a field service pocketbook. He sent the message to the rear in the hope that it would reach Morrell. Suddenly the trench was jammed and further progress was impossible. Broadchalk, who was in the rear of his men, jumped out of the trench and ran forward to see what the matter was. He found a couple of Scots sentries, their bayonets at the present, engaged in a heated altercation with one of his lance corporals. "They won't let us through, sir." A subaltern was standing behind the Scots sentries. "What in the hell does this mean?" asked Broadchalk. The subaltern shrugged his shoulders. My instructions are not to let anybody pass down this communication trench without a written order, he said. Broadchalk saw red. Damn it, he cried. You passed the written order down to us yourself not 2 minutes ago. The subaltern shrugged his shoulders and muttered something unintelligible. Where's your company commander? Gasped Broadchalk. On getting no answer, he stared helplessly about him. The small trench was hopelessly jammed. A fresh batch of Fusiliers and Sussex, who had worked their way back from the dump, were clustering in a knot in the rear. And even as Broadchalk noticed them, a German machine gun from one of the houses snapped greedily at the morsel set before it, and having wiped out the group, started to work systematically up the trench. He doubled back and rallied the survivors. Come on, he shouted, out of that, quick! They sprang forward once more and doubled across the British front for 100 yards. Here you are, laddies, bawled out a voice. It was from a giant Scots sergeant. They scrambled into the trench and found themselves amongst friends, the remnants of the Black Watch they had relieved on Saturday night. Well done, the Fusiliers, boomed the voice. Man, you've held a tight corner fine. They passed along that front line, which was packed tight with men, so the packs stuck and the bodies must be jammed against the trench in order to make a passage. Here and there was a semblance of order, where the supports had had 2 days to organize, and had been watching the grim drama being enacted at the fosse. In one such stretch of trench, Broadchalk found some officers. Have you seen anything of the Fusiliers, 73rd Brigade? He asked. I think there are some up on the left. You'd better collect your fellows and stow them behind somewhere. We're hopelessly overcrowded as it is, and you've had your whack. Broadchalk took the hint. It had been an awful job squashing his way through that jammed mass of men. Obviously they were not wanted. It would give him a chance to organize them and see how many were left.
As the train moved out, he said,